We had been reading about how the train interrupted the sounds in Walden, how the train interrupted Henry David Thoreau's meditations. For the rest of the long afternoon, perhaps, my meditations are interrupted only by the faint rattle of a carriage or team along the distant highway. Sometimes on Sundays I heard the bells, the Lincoln, Acton, Bedford, or Concord bell, when the wind was favorable, a faint, sweet, and as it were, natural melody, worth imparting into the wilderness. Do you like church bells rung at a distance? As long as they're at a great distance. At a sufficient distance over the woods, this sound acquires a certain vibratory hum, as if the pine needles in the horizon were the strings of a harp which it swept. All sound are heard at the greatest possible distance produces one and the same effect, a vibration of the universal lyre, just as the intervening atmosphere makes a distant ridge of earth interesting to our eyes by the azure tint it imparts to it. There comes to me in this case a melody which the air has strained and which had conversed with every leaf and needle of the wood, that portion of the sound which the elements had taken up and modulated and echoed from vale to vale. The echo is to some extent an original sound, and therein is the magic and charm of it. It is not merely a repetition of what was worth repeating in the bell, but partly the voice of the wood, the same trivial words and notes sung by a wood nymph. That evening the distant lowing of some cow in the horizon beyond the woods sounded sweet and melodious, and at first I would mistake it for the voices of certain minstrels by whom I was sometimes serenaded, who might be straying over hill and dale, but soon I was not unpleasantly disappointed when it was prolonged into the cheap and natural music of the cow. I do not mean to be satirical, but to express my appreciation of those youths singing, when I state that I perceived clearly that it was akin to the music of the cow. I thought we'd read about the music of the spheres, but he's talking about the music of the cow, and they were at length one an articulation of nature. Regularly at 7:30 in one part of the summer, after the evening train had gone by, the whippoorwill chanted their vespers for half an hour, sitting on a stump by my door upon the ridge-pole of the house. They would begin to sing almost with as much precision as a clock within 5 minutes of a particular time, referred to the setting of the sun every evening. Interesting, the regularity of the birds singing. Do you think they have a regular schedule? Mm-hmm. I had a rare opportunity to become acquainted with their habits. Sometimes I heard 4 or 5 at once in different parts of the wood. By accident, one a bar behind the other, and so near me that I distinguished not only the cluck after each note, but often that singular buzzing sound like a fly in a spider's web, only proportionally louder. Sometimes one would circle round and round me in the woods a few feet distant, as if tethered by a string, which probably I was near its eggs. They sang at intervals throughout the night, and were again as musical as ever just before and about dawn. When other birds are still, the screech owls take up the strain like mourning women, their ancient "oo-loo-loo." Their distant scream is truly Ben Jonesian, Wise midnight rags, it is no honest and brunt do wit to who of the poets, but without jesting, a most solemn graveyard ditty, the mutual consolations of suicide lovers, remembering the pangs and delights of supernal love in the infernal groves. Yet I love to hear their wailing, their doleful responses trilled along the woodside, reminding me sometimes of music and singing birds as it were the dark and tearful side of music, the regrets and sighs that would fain be sung. They are the spirits, the low spirits and melancholy forebodings of fallen souls that once in human shape night walked the earth and did the deeds of darkness, now expiating their sins with their wailing limbs and threnodies in the scenery of their transgressions. They give me a new sense of the variety and capacity of that nature which is our common dwelling. Oh, that I never had been born, sighs one on this side of the pond, and circles with the restlessness of despair to some new perch on the gray oaks, then that I never had been born, echoes another on the farther side with tremulous sincerity, and born comes faintly from far in the Lincoln woods. I was also serenaded by a hooting owl. Near at hand, you can fancy it the most melancholy sound in nature, as if she meant by this to stereotype and make permanent inner choir the dying moans of a human being, some poor weak relic of mortality which has left hope behind and howls like an animal, yet with human sobs on entering the dark valley, made more awful by the certain gurgling melodiousness. I find myself beginning with the letters GL when I try to imitate it, expressive of a mind which has reached the gelatinous mildy stage in the mortification of all healthy and courageous thought. It reminded me of gulls and idiots and insane howlings, but now one answers from far woods in a strain made really melodious by distance. Hoo, 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 hoo. And indeed, for the most part, it has suggested only pleasing associations, whether heard by day or night, summer or winter. I rejoice that there are owls. Let them do the idiotic and maniacal hooting for men. It is a sound admirably suited to swamps and twilight woods, which no day illustrates, suggesting a vast and undeveloped nature which men have not recognized. They represent the stark twilight and unsatisfied thoughts which all have. All day the sun has shone on the surface of some savage swamp where the single spruce stands hung with usnea lichens, and small hawks circulate above, and the chickadee lisp among the evergreens, and the partridge and rabbit skulk beneath. But now a more dismal and fitting day dawns, and a different race of creatures awakes to express the meaning of nature here. Late in the evening I heard the distant rumbling of wagons over bridges, a sound heard farther from almost any other at night, the baying of dogs, and sometimes again the lowing of some disconsolate cow in a distant barnyard. In the meanwhile all the shore rang with the trump of bullfrogs. Do we have trumps now, dear? The trump of a bullfrog. The trump of bullfrogs, the sturdy spirits of ancient and wine bibbers and way sailors, still unrepentant, trying to sing a catch in their Stygian lake. If the Walden nymphs will pardon the comparison, for though there are almost no weeds, there are frogs there, Who would fain keep up the hilarious rules of their old festal tables, through their voices have waxed hoarse and solemnly grave, mocking at mirth, and the wine has lost its flavor, and become only liquor to distend their paunches, and sweet intoxication never comes to drown the memory of the past, but mere saturation and waterloggedness and distension. The most aldermanic, with his chin upon a heart-leaf which serves for a napkin to his drooling chaps under this northern shore, gaffs a deep draught of the once scorned water, and passes round the cup with the ejaculation, "Drunk, drunk, drunk, drunk." That's a bullfrog, and straightway comes over the water from some distant cove the same password repeated, where the next in seniority and girth has gulped down to his mark, and where his observance has made the circuit of the shores, then ejaculates the master of the ceremonies with satisfaction, "Drunk." And each in his turn repeats the same down to the least distended, leakiest and flabbiest paunch, that there be no mistake, and then the bowl goes round and again, until the sun disperses the morning mist, and only the patriarch is not under the pond, but vainly bellowing, "Drunk," from the time to time, and pausing for a reply. I am not sure that I ever heard the sound of cock crowing from my clearing, and I thought that it might be worth the while to keep a cockerel for his music merely as a singing bird. The note of this once wild Indian pheasant is certainly the most remarkable of any birds. If they could be naturalized without being domesticated, it would soon become the most famous sound in our woods. What's a cockerel? It would soon become the most famous sound in our woods, surpassing the clangor of the goose or the hooting of the owl. And then imagine the crackling of the hens to fill the pauses when their lords' clarions rested. That's just a cock, a male chicken, huh? He wants a cock to crow in the morning. Hmm. No wonder that man added this bird to his tame stock, to say nothing of the eggs and drumsticks. We should just have a cock, I guess, to wake us up. To walk in a winter morning in a wood where these birds abounded, their native woods, and hear the wild cockerels crow on the trees. They have wild cockerels, and clear and shrill for the miles over the resounding earth, drowning the feebler notes of other birds. Think of it. It would put nations on alert. Who would not be early to rise, and rise earlier and earlier every successive day of life, till he become unspeakably healthy, wealthy, and wise? If we had these birds cocking and crowing everywhere, would everyone get healthy? They could. Who would not be early to rise, and rise earlier and earlier every successive day, and sit in longer and longer meditation, till he became unspeakably healthy, wealthy, and wise? This foreign bird's note is celebrated by the poets of all countries, along with the notes of their native songsters. All climates agree with brave Chanticleer. He is more indigenous even than the natives. His health is ever good, his lungs are sound, his spirits never flag. Even the sailor on the Atlantic and Pacific is wakened by his voice. What do they keep him on the boat? They must have chickens on the boat at sea, right? But it is shrill sound never roused me from my slumbers. I kept neither dog, cat, cow, pig, nor hens. He has no dog, cat, cow, pig, or hens. so that you would have said there was a deficiency of domestic sounds, neither the churn nor the spinning wheel, nor even the singing of the kettle, or the hissing of the urn, no children crying to comfort one. An old-fashioned man would have lost his senses or died of ennui before this. Don't you think he should have had a musical instruments like a flute or a harp, guitar? What would he play? He didn't have his violin. Not even rats in the wall, for they were starved out, or rather were never baited in, only squirrels on the roof or under the floor, a whippoorwill on the ridgepole, a blue jay screaming beneath the window, a hare or woodchuck under the house. You won't believe it, but in Oberlin I actually had a woodchuck under the house. Don't you want to keep the woodchuck? He wasn't considered good because he'd dig up the foundation. Woodchuck under the house, a screech owl or a cat owl beneath it, a flock of wild geese or a laughing loon on the pond, and the fox to bark in the night. Doesn't this make you want to live in the country, and the deep country, to hear the sounds? Did you hear any sounds when we went to Emily Dickinson's house? You did? I thought they were like loud crickets or something. What was the sound? Not even a lark or a oriole, those mild plantation birds, ever visited my clearing. No cockerels to crow, nor hens to crackle in the yard. No yard, but unfenced nature reaching up to your very sills. A young forest growing up under your windows, and wild sumacs and blackberry vines breaking through into your cellar. Sturdy pitch pines rubbing and creaking against the shingles for want of room. The roots reaching quite under the house, instead of a scuttle or a blind blown off in the gale, a pine tree snapped off or torn up by the roots behind your house for fuel. Instead of no path through the front yard gate in the great snow, no gate, no front yard, and no path through the civilized world. Do you understand what he's talking about? Seems that this would be interesting to have nature come back again. This one guy on Facebook, he shows where they have these seed bombs, and they could drop these little bombs that are tree planting bombs, and it takes a seed, a little tree seed, and drops it into the ground. And they said with one of these airplanes dropping tree seed bombs, they can plant 1 billion trees. You think we could reach our goal of each person planting 100 trees? Let's see, we'd have 7 billion trees. 700 billion trees. That might do it, to reverse greenhouse gas and stuff. We had 700 billion trees. Well, that's faster than, I guess, each person planting a tree. But that takes up greenhouse gas to fly the plane. The next section is solitude. This is how to be alone when you're reading or listening to Walden. how to be alone. This is a delicious evening when the whole body is one sense and imbibes delight through every pore. You can just have pure delight. Do you believe in just experiencing delight? Just pure, raw delight from being alone after 3-4 hours of meditation. I go and come with a strange liberty in nature, a part of herself, and as I walk along the stony shore of the pond in my shirt sleeves, though it is cool as well as cloudy and windy, I see nothing special to attract me. All the elements are unusually congenial to me. The bullfrogs trump. Seems the bullfrogs, before Trump, the bullfrogs were trumping. Bullfrogs trump to usher in the night, and the note of the whippoorwill is borne on the rippling wind from over the water. Sympathy with the fluttering alder and popular leaves almost takes away my breath. Yet, like the lake, my serenity is rippled but not ruffled. His serenity is rippled but not ruffled. Do you feel that that's a good way to have serenity? These small waves raised by the evening wind are as remote from storm as the smooth reflecting surface, though it is now dark. The wind still blows and roars in the wood, the waves still dash, and some creatures lull the rest with their notes. The repose is never complete. The wildest animals do not repose, but seek the prey now. Like you said, they're always hunting. All they do is eat. The fox, the skunk, and the rabbit now roam the fields and woods without fear. They are nature's watchmen, links which connect the days of animated life. When I return to my house, I find that visitors have been there and left their cards, either a bunch of flowers or a wreath of evergreen or a name in pencil on a yellow walnut leaf or a chip. They who come rarely to the woods take some small piece of the forest into their hands to play with by the way, which they leave either intentionally or accidentally. Do you leave like walking? Some people, they leave their walking stick, or they carve their name in the tree. They leave stuff. They leave their water bottles. One has peeled a willow wand, woven it into a ring, and dropped it on my table. I cannot always tell if visitors had called in my absence, either by the bend. I could always tell if visitors had called, either by the bended twigs or grass, or the print of their shoes, and generally of what sex or age or quality they were, by some slight trace left as a flower dropped, or a bunch of grass plucked and thrown away, even as far off as the railroad, half a mile distant, or by the lingering odor of a cigar or pipe. Nay, I was frequently notified of the passage of a traveler along the highway 60 rods off by the scent of his pipe. There is commonly sufficient space about us. Our horizon is never quite at our elbows. The thick wood is not just at our door, nor the pond, but somewhat is always clearing, familiar and worn by us, appropriated and fenced in some way, and reclaimed from nature. Is he speaking abstractly in generalization? For what reason have I this vast range and circuit, some square miles of unfrequented wood, for my privacy, abandoned to me by men? My nearest neighbor is a a mile distant, and no house is visible from any place but the hilltops within half a mile of my own. Generally, the areas belong to the person who looks. You could have whatever house you want in the country, but if you're not there, don't look at it. It's more likely to be seen by Henry. I have my horizon bounded by woods all to myself. A distant view of the railroad where it touches the pond on the one hand and the fence which skirts the woodland road and on the other. But for the most part it is as solitary where I live as on the prairies. It is as much Asian or African as New England, and I have, as it were, my own sun and moon and stars and a little world all to myself. The night there was never a traveler passed my house, or knocked at my door, more than if I were the first or last man, unless it were in the spring, when at long intervals some came from the village to fish for pouts. They plainly fished much more in the Walden pond in their own natures, and baited their hooks with darkness. They plainly fished much more in the Walden pond of their own natures, and baited their hooks with darkness, but they soon retreated, usually with light baskets, and left the world to darkness and to me, and the black kernel of the night was never profaned by any human neighbor. Deep night you can have left to be left alone. I believe that men are generally still a little afraid of the dark, though the witches are all hung, and Christianity and candles have been introduced. People are afraid of the dark. They don't have the 5 charged names of Simran. They could be afraid. Yet I experienced something that the most sweet and tender, the most innocent and encouraging society may be found in any natural object, even for the poor anthrope and his misanthrope and most melancholy man. There can be no very black melancholy to him who lives in the midst of nature and has his senses still. Didn't that doctor on the television say that you can cure melancholy by going for a walk in the woods? Or was it they were curing this lack of sunlight or seasonal sickness where your lack of sunshine? There can be no very black melancholy, for to him who lives in the midst of nature and has his senses still, there was never yet such a storm. But it was Aeolian music to a healthy and innocent ear. Nothing can rightly compel a simple and brave man to a vulgar sadness. While I enjoy the friendship of the seasons, I trust that nothing can make life a burden to me. The gentle rain which waters my beans and keeps me in the house today is not drear and melancholy, but good for me too. Though it prevents my hoeing them, it is of far more worth than my hoeing. The rain has more value than its hoeing. Weeding the beans, hoeing. You don't know your Americana? Hoeing? I know what hoeing is because I'm born under the tradition of New England. My ancestors are from New England. If I should continue so long as to cause the seeds to rot in the ground and destroy the potatoes in the lowlands, it would still be good for the grass on the uplands. And being hoeing, Hoeing. You see, my ancestors landed in Boston in 1634. So that makes me a son of the American Revolution. A son. So, let's see. So they lived in Massachusetts, actually. Didn't they live in, they lived in Massachusetts near Amherst. And, Hadley, or South Hadley or Hadley, Massachusetts. So linguistically, their language was passed to Ohio during the Firelands, for the Firelands. Linguistically, I learned hoeing. So I learned how to hoe beans like Thoreau. If it should continue so long as to cause the seeds to rot in the ground and destroy the potatoes in the lowlands, it would still be good for the grass on the uplands, and being good for the grass, it would be good for me. Sometimes when I compare myself with other men, it seems as if I were more favored by the gods than they. He's more favored by the gods than other men. Beyond any deserts that I am conscious of, if I had a warrant and surety at my hands with which my fellows have not, and which were especially guided and guarded, I do not flatter myself, but if it be possible, they flatter me. I have never felt lonesome or in the least oppressed by the sense of solitude. But once, and that was a few weeks after I came to the woods, when for an hour I doubted if the near neighborhood of man was not essential to a serene and healthy life. Solitude is essential. Didn't Sawan Singh say solitude is the best of luck? It's lucky. You have solitude, you got lucky. It's like winning the lottery. But once, and that was a few weeks after, to be alone was something unpleasant. But I was at the same time conscious of a slight insanity in my mood, and seemed to foresee my recovery in the midst of a gentle rain. While these thoughts prevailed, I was suddenly sensible of such sweet and beneficent society in nature, in the very pattering of the drops, and in every sound and sight around my house, an infinite and unaccountable friendliness, all at once, like an atmosphere sustaining me, as made the fancied advantages of human neighborhood insignificant, and I have never thought of them since. It seems for entertainment, he listened to the raindrops. Mm-hmm. Do you see him as sort of like a Zen monk in the woods in Japan or something? Who was the guys like Sagyo or Basho or somebody? Do you think he would have fit in Japan? Yeah. Mm-hmm. The American side, yeah. He actually writes about nature. In Nature is covered by Suzuki. Mm. Mm. I wonder if it's similar, would be similar to this. Every little pine needle expanded and swelled with sympathy and befriended me. I was so distinctly made aware of the presence of something kindred to me, even in scenes which we are accustomed to call wild and dreary, and also that the nearest of blood to me and the humanist was not a person nor a villager, that I thought no place could ever be strange to me again. Morning untimely consumes the sad, few are the days in the land of the living. Beautiful daughter of Kaskar. Some of my pleasantest hours were during the long rainstorms in the spring or fall, which confined me to the house for the afternoon as well as the forenoon. Are we confined to the house in winter to read Walden? And are those some of the most pleasant moments? Are they? Some of my most pleasant hours were during the long winter storms in New York when we had to stay indoors and read Walden. Rainstorms in the spring or fall which confined me to the house for the more afternoon as well as the forenoon, soothed by their ceaseless roar and pelting, when an early twilight ushered in a long evening in which many thoughts had time to take root and unfold themselves. In those driving northeast rains which tried the village houses so, and the maids stood ready with mop and pail in front entries to keep the deluge out, I sat behind my door in my little house, which was all entry, and thoroughly enjoyed its protection. In one heavy rainstorm, the lightning struck a large pitch pine across the pond, making a very conspicuous and perfectly regular spiral groove from top to bottom, an inch or more deep and 4 or 5 inches wide, as you would groove a walking stick. I passed it again the other day and was struck with awe on looking up and beholding that mark, now more distinct than ever, where a terrific and resistless bolt came down out of the harmless sky 8 years ago. Men frequently say to me, quote, I should think you would feel lonesome down there and want to be near to folks, rainy and snowy days and nights especially. I am tempted to reply to such, this whole earth which we inhabit is but a point in space. How far apart, think you, dwell the two most distant inhabitants of yonder star, the breadth of whose disk cannot be appreciated by our instruments? Why should I feel lonely? Is not our planet in the Milky Way? This which you put seems to me not to be the most important question. What sort of space is that which separates a man from his fellows and makes him solitary? I have found that no exertion of the legs can bring two minds much nearer to one another. What good is it to be close if the minds are not close? The minds can be repulsed. What do we want most to dwell near to? Not too many men, surely the deep Depot, the post office, the bathroom, the meeting house, the schoolhouse, the grocery, Beacon Hill, or the 5 Points where men must congregate, but to the perennial source of our life. Once in all our experience we have found that to issue as the willow stands near the water and sends out its roots in that direction. You ever look at like what was the minimum requirements of each town? Each town of the world. Like each town has a bakery, or a grocery, or a gas station, or a post office. If you had no duplication, right, you could have, because of the need for competition in capitalism, you have to duplicate somehow. If you had only one of each thing, you might have less clutter, town clutter. I don't know, the economic answer, we'd have to read economics in Thoreau. We'll get through Thoreau, we can work on that once we've gotten through a thorough reading of Thoreau. This will vary with different natures, but this is the place where a wise man will dig his cellar. I one evening overtook one of my townsmen who has accumulated what is called a handsome property, though I never got a fair view of it, on the Walden road, driving a pair of cattle to market, who inquired of me how I could bring my mind to give up so many of the comforts of life. I answered that I was very sure I liked it passably well. I was not joking, and so I went home to my bed and left him to pick his way through the darkness and the mud to Brighton or Brighttown, which place he would reach some time in the morning. Any prospect of awakening or coming to life to a dead man makes indifferent all times and places. The place where that may occur is always the same and indescribably pleasant to all our senses. For the most part, we allow only outlying and transient circumstances to make our occasions. They are, in fact, the cause of our distraction. The nearest of all things is that power which fashions the being. Next to us, the grandest laws are continually being executed. Next to us is not the workman whom we have hired, with whom we love so well to talk, but the workmen whose work we are. How vast and profound is the influence of the subtitle powers of earth and heaven and of earth. We seek to perceive them, and we do not see them. We seek to hear them, and we do not hear them. Identified with the substance of things, we cannot be separated from them. Is he suggesting we're supposed to hear the music of the spheres? We don't hear it, but we're supposed to. They cause that in all the universe men purify. They cause that in all the universe men purify and sanctify their hearts and clothe themselves in their holy holiday garments to offer sacrifices and oblations to their ancestors. It is an ocean of the window. It's not open. No. Why is it cold? You perceive cold, but I hear heat coming. How do we achieve heat? Through gas heat. It is an ocean of subtile intelligences. They are everywhere, above us, on our left, on our right. They environ us on all sides. We are the subjects of an experiment which is not a little interesting to me. Can we not do without the society of our gossips a little, while under these circumstances have our own thoughts to cheer us? So Confucius says truly, virtue does not remain As an abandoned orphan, it must of necessity have neighbors. With thinking we may be beside ourselves in a same sense. By a conscious effort of the mind we can stand aloof from actions and their consequences, and all things, good and bad, go by us like a torrent. We are not wholly involved in nature. I may be either the driftwood in the stream or Indra in the sky looking down on it. I may be affected by a theoretical exhibition. On the other hand, I may not be affected by an actual event which appears to concern me much more. I only know myself as a human entity, the scene, so to speak, of thoughts and affections, and am sensible of a certain doubleness by which I can stand as remote from myself as from another. He's trying to stand as remote from himself as another. What is that? I thought you knew everything and had an answer. However intense my experience, I all know myself as a human entity, the scene, so to speak, of thoughts and affections, and am sensible of a certain doubleness by which I can stand as remote from myself as from another. Do you stand remote from yourself? Oh, he can withdraw and see himself remotely. He can, however intense my experience, I am conscious of the presence and criticism of a part of me, which, as it were, is not a part of me, but spectator, sharing no experience, but taking note of it, and that is no more I than it is you. When they play, I may be, the tragedy of life is over, the spectator goes his way. It was a kind of fiction, a work of the imagination only, so far as he was concerned. The doubleness may easily make us poor neighbors and friends sometimes. Well, some people say life is a dream. Well, he's talking about his soul perceiving life in a remote sense, or the universal cosmic consciousness. Hmm? I find it wholesome to be alone the greater part of the time. To be in company, even with the best, is soon wearisome and dissipating. Things can be dissipating if you hang out with the pub. If you just hung out at the pub in town, maybe you think you'd dissipate it all. I love to be alone. I never found the companion that was so companionable as solitude. We are for the most part more lonely when we go abroad among men than when we stay in our chambers. A man thinking or working is always alone. Let him be where he will. Solitude is not measured by the miles of space that intervene between a man and his fellows. The real diligent student in one of the crowded hives of Cambridge College is as solitary as a dervish in the desert. The farmer can work alone in the field or the woods all day, hoeing or chopping, and not feel lonesome, because he is employed. But when he comes home at night, he cannot sit down in a room alone at the mercy of his thoughts, but must be where he can see the folks and recreate as he thinks, remunerate himself for his day's solitude. and hence he wonders how the student can sit alone in the house all night and most of the day without ennui and the blues, but he does not realize that the student, though in the house, is still at work in his field and chopping in his wood's ends. The farmer is his, and in turn seeks the same recreation in society as the latter does, though it may be a more condensed form of it. Were you both a student and living on a farm? Did you used to study at home when your father would come home from the field? We won't tell that story. We only do positive engineering here. This is all positive channel. Society is commonly too cheap. We meet at very short intervals, not having had time to acquire any new value for each other. We meet at meals 3 times a day and give each other a new taste of that old musty cheese that we have. We have had to agree on a certain set of rules called etiquette and politeness to make this frequent meeting tolerable, and that we need not come to open war. We meet at the post office and at the sociable and about the fireside every night. We live in thick and are in each other's way and stumble over one another. Do we stumble over the stuff on the stairs? And I think that we thus lose some respect for one another. Certainly less frequency would suffice for all important and hearty communications. He's saying have a less frequent contact. Consider the girls in a factory never alone, hardly in their dreams. It would be better if there were but one inhabitant to a square mile, as where I live. He's suggesting one person per square mile. The value of a man is not in his skin, that we should touch him. This goes on with solitude. We read about solitude and sounds. We read how you have to have politeness and etiquette with a bunch of people around. And we read about him reviewing himself, withdrawn from himself, an annihilation of the self above the body. And we read about the minimalist town and solitude, and my serenity is rippled but not ruffled. He had his serenity rippled but not ruffled, and he had a woodchuck under the house. And if he had a cock crowing, he would get up earlier and earlier till he became healthy, wealthy, and wise. And he talked about the trump with the bullfrogs. And instead of the music of the spears, he had the music of the cow. We were reading Sounds in Solitude.
You said that. You said those are the sounds of the forest.
He had the birds. He had the sounds are the music of the spheres. Well, those were made by the music of the spheres, those sounds. Because if everything is made by it, he heard the music of the spheres. We read the sounds of in solitude. The sounds in solitude in Walden. While we were in the forced solitude of winter. Was it forced on us, or it's not by force. We volunteered to read Walden. Why are we reading Walden when we could be reading something much more esoteric?
I feel like I have Thoreau next to me.
Thoreau.
Thoreau.
You think it can come to life with a book? Why can't you just replicate Walden? How come they don't have the Walden Airbnb to go to? We just went to Walden's, Henry David Thoreau's Airbnb at Walden. We finished reading it. Yeah? Alright, we're gonna finish there because I hear the sound of the wind. I don't hear the birds. We ask where the birds went. Where'd the birds go? You asked the question, which Henry has to answer. Where'd the birds go in winter? He would be out looking for them. So I'm going to go out and look for the birds and figure out where they went, because that's a naturalistic question. Where do the birds go in winter? And how come I can't hear them sing? Do you hear a bird? I don't hear any birds. We'll go look for something then.